Ferrari had given Hamilton the fastest red car they could build, but it was a machine that spoke a language he didn't yet understand. In Bahrain, it understeered like a truck. In Monza, it snapped like a trap. And every lap since has been a fight between instinct and adaptation. Then came Mika Häkkinen's verdict. The one sentence that sent shockwaves through Maranello. It can take 4 to 5 years to mold a car to your driving style. If Häkkinen is right, Hamilton's Ferrari dream isn't behind schedule. It's barely begun, because the real question isn't whether Lewis can adapt to Ferrari. It's whether Ferrari can survive long enough to adapt to Lewis. When Lewis Hamilton described the SF25 as alien, it wasn't a metaphor. It was telemetry speaking through frustration. Ferrari's 2025 car demands a completely different rhythm from what Hamilton built his legend on. At Mercedes, his braking phase was long and stable, designed to harvest energy while rotating the car smoothly on entry. The SF25, by contrast, punishes that style. Its narrower operating window means the rear axle snaps under the very trail braking that once defined Hamilton's control. Engineers measured it early in the season. Hamilton's brake pressure trace lingered 0.18 seconds longer than Leclerc's into turn 9 at Bahrain. Just enough to destabilize the rear balance and cost him 0.14 seconds through the apex. That pattern repeated race after race. At Suzuka, Hamilton's corner exit delta was consistently 0.2 down in Sector 1 because he was managing throttle application to avoid rear-end oscillation. In isolation, those margins look small. Over 307 kilometers, they translate into strategic despair. The issue isn't raw pace, it's communication. Ferrari's hybrid deployment logic differs sharply from Mercedes' system. The SF25's ERS release delivers an abrupt torque spike at mid-corner exit, forcing Hamilton to delay throttle pickup by fractions of a second. Multiply that across 60 laps, and you lose the cumulative rhythm that makes a driver feel connected. Inside Maranello, engineers call it adaptation by attrition. Each session becomes a tug-of-war between Hamilton's instincts and Ferrari's philosophy. The cockpit ergonomics, brake feel, even steering torque map are designed for Leclerc's precision-heavy inputs. Hamilton, who thrives on instinctive rotation and late braking, finds himself fighting muscle memory. The data confirms it. His steering angle corrections per lap are averaging 23% higher than Leclerc's, a statistic that screams discomfort. And yet, buried in those numbers, there's a hint of progress. In Singapore, his sector split tightened to within 0.09 seconds of Leclerc's average, suggesting adaptation is underway. But just as Hamilton begins to bridge the gap, another obstacle looms: the 2026 regulation reset that threatens to rewrite the entire handling language once again. For most drivers, the 2026 regulation change looks like a clean slate. For Lewis Hamilton, it could feel more like a trapdoor. The new rules promise lighter cars, 30 kilograms shaved off the minimum weight, and active aerodynamics that replace the long-trusted DRS system. On paper, that should play to Hamilton's strengths: adaptability, precision, and mastery of dynamic balance. But beneath the optimism hides a cruel twist. Every adjustment Hamilton has made this season to tame the SF25 may become obsolete overnight. The biggest shift will come from the new power unit formula. Electrical output is set to triple, with energy recovery systems accounting for nearly 50% of total power delivery. That means throttle modulation, brake bias, and corner rotation will depend as much on battery mapping as mechanical grip. For a driver already struggling to sync his inputs with Ferrari's energy deployment model, this isn't evolution. It's a complete reset. Ferrari's simulation team estimates that, under the 2026 regulations, lift and coast distances could increase by as much as 80 meters per lap at circuits like Montreal. That changes everything about Hamilton's approach to corner entry and energy harvesting. The driver who once mastered late braking and aggressive rotation will now have to choreograph energy regeneration with millisecond precision. It's not just driving anymore, it's programming on the fly. Häkkinen's warning about patience suddenly takes on prophetic weight. If it truly takes 4 to 5 years to build harmony between man and machine, Hamilton's adaptation timeline extends well beyond his initial Ferrari contract. By the time the new chassis and powertrain settle, he could be 42 years old, staring at the twilight of a career defined by precision, not patience. Yet there's an irony here. The 2026 reset might also be Hamilton's best weapon. Regulations that scramble the grid have always created space for experience to shine. Hamilton thrived in chaos before, Think of his late-season charge in 2018 when tyre degradation became unpredictable. If he can read the 2026 cars faster than his rivals, Ferrari's learning curve could bend back in his favour. But first, Ferrari must prove it can build a platform worthy of that experience, and history suggests that's a battle of its own. Inside Ferrari's walls, progress isn't measured only in lap time, it's measured in politics. Since Hamilton's arrival, Maranello has been split between two philosophies: the data-driven engineers pushing for incremental precision, and the race team, veterans who believe Ferrari's soul lives in instinct and risk. Hamilton sits awkwardly in the middle. He comes from Mercedes, a team where every simulation loop was gospel. But Ferrari's race culture still relies heavily on intuition, the human element that has made the Scuderia both magical and maddening for decades. This tension surfaced most clearly after the Spanish Grand Prix. Hamilton's engineering group requested a fundamental recalibration of the brake-by-wire system to smooth out mid-corner transitions. It was the kind of systems-level modification Mercedes would sign off within days. At Ferrari, it triggered a committee review. Weeks later, the change was approved, only for Leclerc's camp to contest it, arguing that the adjustment compromised front-end rotation. The final calibration was a political compromise, not a performance one. The result? A car that satisfied no one and confused everyone. The internal feedback process is slower too. Data from race weekends often filters through 3 layers of approval before it's implemented in simulator builds. Hamilton has grown visibly impatient. His engineers estimate Ferrari's average feedback to implementation cycle runs 22 to 25 seconds slower per call-out than the Mercedes standard during live sessions, and sometimes one race later in terms of setup evolution. That gap adds up. Mika Häkkinen's 4 to 5 year warning wasn't just about adaptation, it was about bureaucracy. To mould a car around a driver, a team must be agile enough to respond in real time. Ferrari's layered structure, designed to protect its hierarchy, often smothers that agility. The irony is brutal. Hamilton joined Ferrari to ignite it, not inherit its inertia. Still, there are signs of alignment. Team principal Fred Vasseur has begun bypassing certain approval steps for Hamilton-specific feedback, allowing direct engineering communication from garage to design office. It's a quiet revolution, but one that could determine whether Hamilton's Ferrari chapter becomes redemption or repetition. For all of Hamilton's adaptation struggles, one variable defines how fast that process moves: Charles Leclerc. In pure lap time terms, their margin this season has hovered around 0.17 seconds per qualifying session. But the real divide isn't mechanical, it's philosophical. Leclerc grew up inside Ferrari's engineering language. His driving inputs, short braking bursts, immediate throttle pickups, and mid-corner sharpness are the blueprint around which the SF25 was designed. The car bends toward him. Hamilton, meanwhile, is trying to bend it back. The team's internal data paints the picture vividly. In telemetry overlays from Monza, Leclerc gained 0.3 in the Lesmas alone by leaning on the car's nervous front end, a style Hamilton avoids because it overheats the tyres over longer stints. Ferrari's engineers call it the feedback paradox. Every setup that helps Hamilton find consistency erodes Leclerc's rotation advantage, and vice versa. What should be a shared development path has become a delicate balancing act between two fundamentally different interpretations of how a Ferrari should drive. The relationship remains cordial in public, but behind closed doors, engineers whisper about parallel projects. Leclerc's garage favours an aggressive front ride height that amplifies turn-in bite, while Hamilton's side experiments with softer rear suspension loads to stabilise traction zones. On paper, they're running the same car. In practice, they're developing two versions of Ferrari's identity. This split is why Häkkinen's 5-year comment hit a nerve. To make a car truly yours, the entire technical program must orbit your style, from suspension kinematics to wind tunnel philosophy. Hamilton doesn't have that yet. He's still a guest in Leclerc's house. And unless Ferrari commits fully to a single developmental compass, Hamilton's adaptation curve could flatten before it rises. The irony? Leclerc himself may not be immune to the coming reset. The 2026 active aero package could neutralise his greatest strength, high-speed front-end aggression, while amplifying Hamilton's finesse with weight transfer and dynamic balance. In a sense, time and regulation might end up doing what Ferrari politics cannot, forcing both drivers onto the same page. When Mika Häkkinen spoke of a 4 to 5 year timeline, many dismissed it as nostalgia from another era. But those who know Formula One's evolution understood his point instantly. Modern cars are ecosystems, vast feedback networks of sensors, simulators, and software built to reflect one driver's DNA. Building that reflection takes time, not just talent. For Hamilton, that time is running parallel with age. He turns 40 in January 2026, meaning his Ferrari integration project overlaps directly with what should be the decline phase of any driver's reflex arc. But Hamilton has always rewritten the rulebook on decline. His cognitive performance metrics, reaction time, decision precision, spatial mapping, remain elite. Mercedes' final biometric analysis from 2023 showed Hamilton's reaction delta at 0.16 seconds, only 0.03 slower than his peak in 2019. That's a negligible drop for someone entering their third decade in the sport. What Häkkinen meant wasn't that Hamilton would need 5 years to learn, assume. It's that Ferrari would need 5 years to listen. The machinery must evolve to him, not just with him. There's precedent. Michael Schumacher's arrival in 1996 was followed by 5 barren years before Ferrari finally produced the F2001, the car that embodied his driving rhythm. Schumacher's genius wasn't adaptation alone. It was patience wrapped in influence. He rebuilt Ferrari's methodology from the inside. Hamilton faces a similar puzzle, but under tighter time pressure and with less institutional freedom. Häkkinen's insight also hints at a paradox. The longer Hamilton stays, the more data Ferrari gathers about his needs. Yet the shorter his physical prime becomes. The window to align those two curves is closing fast. Ferrari's sporting department believes that by mid-2026, Hamilton will have completed over 900 simulator hours, roughly the same milestone Schumacher hit before his breakthrough. If history rhymes, that could be the moment when Hamilton's intuition finally fuses with Ferrari's algorithms. But the path there will be brutal. Patience in Formula One isn't passive. It's active resistance against frustration, politics, and physics. Häkkinen's timeline may sound pessimistic, but to Hamilton, it's simply the cost of building greatness from imperfection. Ferrari's 2026 project is already being called the moonshot. Inside Maranello's Gestione Sportiva facility, over 200 engineers are now assigned to the all-new chassis and power unit. The concept, internally labelled Tipo 678, represents Ferrari's most radical departure since the 2014 hybrid era. Active aerodynamics will allow the car to trim drag down the straights and stack downforce through corners, effectively transforming the vehicle's aero map every few hundred metres. On paper, that should erase the top speed deficit that has haunted Ferrari since the start of the hybrid age. But the gamble lies deeper than wind tunnel numbers. The real unknown is how the new hybrid powertrain will behave under stress. Ferrari's energy recovery system will operate at nearly triple the electrical output of today's SF25, a seismic jump that places thermal load management front and centre. Their simulations suggest battery temperatures could exceed 80 degrees Celsius under sustained push laps, risking performance drop-off if not managed with perfect precision. That's where Hamilton's input becomes critical. His experience managing complex energy cycles at Mercedes could dictate whether Ferrari's new power unit becomes a weapon or a liability. There's cautious optimism. Hamilton has already spent over 120 hours in Ferrari's simulator, testing 2026 braking models, helping refine regenerative balance between the MGUK and hydraulic systems. His feedback reportedly reduced predicted mid-corner instability by 14% in the latest CFD iterations. A promising sign that the communication gap that plagued 2025 is finally narrowing. Yet optimism doesn't equal readiness. Ferrari's last major concept leap, the SF1000 in 2020, collapsed under correlation errors between wind tunnel and track data. The team cannot afford a repeat. Still, there's a sense that Hamilton's patience, the very trait Häkkinen warned he'd need, is paying off. For the first time since his arrival, Ferrari's engineers are building around his instincts, rather than adapting him to theirs. The next generation Ferrari might not just be lighter, it might carry Hamilton's fingerprints in its DNA, but in Formula One, theory only matters until the first lap of testing. If Ferrari's moonshot misses its orbit, Hamilton's patience could evaporate overnight, and Maranello's 5-year plan could shrink to 5 races. Every great driver faces one defining paradox: when to stop believing that time will fix everything. For Lewis Hamilton, that moment may be fast approaching. His journey at Ferrari isn't just about speed, it's about endurance against expectation. He arrived as the saviour, the man who could turn Maranello's nostalgia into modern dominance. A year later, the myth has been replaced by math. No wins, no podiums, and an average qualifying gap of 0.17 seconds to his teammate. And yet, the story is far from failure. What Ferrari is building now mirrors the slow burn process that turned Schumacher's years of frustration into an empire. The difference is the clock. Häkkinen's 5-year claim was never a prophecy. It was a mirror. It reflects how long it takes for an institution as layered and traditional as Ferrari to reshape itself around one man's rhythm. Whether Hamilton can wait that long depends less on reflexes and more on belief. Because the physics are not the real obstacle, the politics are. If Ferrari gives Hamilton full influence over development direction, prioritizing his feel over simulator data, 2026 could finally be the alignment year. But if the internal tug-of-war continues, he may spend his final seasons fighting ghosts of bureaucracy rather than rivals on track. The sport's history is littered with such crossroads. Senna at McLaren, Alonso at Ferrari, Vettel in the hybrid era, each face the same dilemma: evolution or exile. Hamilton's advantage is self-awareness. He knows how long greatness takes to mature. And unlike the impatient rookies chasing him, he doesn't need validation. He needs purpose. The man who once chased records is now chasing resonance, a car that responds like an extension of himself. Ferrari offers that possibility, but not without sacrifice. So can Hamilton outlast Ferrari's learning curve? The evidence says yes, but only if both sides redefine what success looks like. If Häkkinen's clock runs true, 2029 might be the year Ferrari finally becomes Hamilton's team in spirit and performance. Until then, every lap, every debrief, every compromise is another step in the slowest, hardest race of his career.